Hey, gang, before we get into this next episode, can I just say it would mean the world to me if you can go ahead and like this episode and also subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't yet. Plus, if you enjoy the episode, sharing the content with your friends, family, coworkers, or anyone else you think might benefit from what you're hearing, it helps so much. It's not just about the algorithm. It's about sharing the ideas that are being talked about on this show and creating more community through compassion. So again, if you enjoy the show and you like what you're hearing, don't be afraid to subscribe. It means more than you can possibly know. And frankly, at the end of the day, it means that we get to engage more with each other. And that's really what this is all about. Hey gang, I'm Nikila Croce and you're listening to Who the Fuck. And on today's episode, I'm sharing the mic with Constantin Morun. And Constantin's the creator and host of Unleash Thyself, a podcast with a mission to help unleash the true potential of all of us by inspiring, empowering, guiding, and supporting people on their life journey. His passion for personal and professional development, coupled with his love of technology, has driven his own journey for over 15 years. And with a philosophy very similar to my own, Constantin offers his platform to guests to share their experiences and lessons, as well as those journeys that he's gone on. So welcome to the show, Constantin. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I really enjoyed our first conversation. It felt like speaking to somebody who knew exactly where I was at in that moment. We both have had lengthy careers in technology and started pursuing podcasting as a passion project. And we're both, as we were saying, before we hit record, trying to navigate that journey and find the right balance of things. And so, one of the things that we spoke about originally was how we can often get comfortable with the monotony and the predictability in our lives because that offers us a sense of security. But it also limits our potential and our ability to find purpose. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about sort of the way that you've come through your journey, and then we can dive a bit deeper into all of the backstory.
Yeah, I love that question, Nikki. And it's something that fascinated me in the last few months, really. So I did a bit of digging into why is it that the mind or the brain or the ego wants us to stay the same, yet deep down in our hearts, we want more for ourselves. We want to realize whatever potential we feel that is inside of us. And like many of your listeners and many people I know in my life, I've been there myself. Where I was fine with the status quo, I was fine with just yet another day, looking forward to maybe a vacation in 6 to 12 months. And that was like the only thing I would be excited about. And really what I've come to realize is that if you look at the human brain, the human mind, the ego, it's all driven by how we evolved as human beings. So what was safe for us is what we knew. So being in my tribe, being in my cave, being in my place was safe. So going outside of it meant that there would be a potentiality for us to be killed, right? Or to lose connection to our tribe, or to not find or get enough food. Now, keep in mind, this was not even hundreds of years ago, right? Could have been, for some of us, could have been 100 years ago. For some of us, could have been 1,000 years ago, but it wasn't that far back in our history, and we don't evolve that fast. So what I've come to realize is that our minds, our brains, want to keep us in the same spot because it wants to protect us. It wants the best for us. But yet, we know that our hearts, which have been proven to be just as integral to our self as the brain when it comes to making decisions and going for the ones, realize that we have a lot more to offer to the world. But that means doing what's uncomfortable. That means going outside of the norm and challenging the status quo. So now you have that friction. So for me, that's how it resulted in depression, because I knew in my heart I wanted to do some things. My brain was telling me otherwise. I had a comfortable life with a good job, good family support. So then I fell into the trap where I was just staying small because it was safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that you went there, because this week, in fact, I've been consuming a lot of content around that and really thinking about how our brains are driven to avoid pain and pursue pleasure. And It's like it used to be a lot more functional for the ways of survival, as you were saying, right? We keep ourselves small now in present day because we're afraid of the outcome, but the outcome isn't initially life-threatening necessarily. Now, that's not to say if we don't, address issues that we have, that things can't become life-threatening. But this isn't, you're concerned at a very visceral level about going into the wild and being mauled by a bear, right? Like most people aren't dealing with that type of challenge today, unless you're pursuing that. And so I think part of what you're touching on too, that's so important to address, is that while we as a species have evolved our circumstances in society, our bodies and our brains haven't really caught up to that. And so we're having this really challenging moment where it's like, I know personally, like I can feel it in my body. It radiates through me that something is not right, or it's not enough, or I need something different. But this little part of your brain that hasn't fully evolved is like, but it's dangerous. You could die. And it's like, but you won't. And really, for me, I see it as a self-sabotage mechanism rooted in fear of rejection, which, to your point, is like, will I be isolated from the tribe? Will I alienate myself? And so in your experience and in recognition of that, do you feel like that has helped propel you towards your passions because you have a bit more of a psychological understanding of how to navigate that?
Absolutely. There is one thing I like to talk about a lot, which is the idea that awareness is half the battle in everything we do in life. So if you're aware of something you don't like in your life, that means now you can make a conscious decision to make a change around that.
Yeah.
Same with this. Once I understood and became aware of the challenges facing me, I now have a choice to make. Do I want to actually work with this challenge and overcome it or not? But because I'm aware, that means I can take the next step. If we're not aware, we stay in our dark spot. We don't know what's beyond the horizon or what's in the light. Then we're not going to be able to do much. And for me, that helped a lot. Right? I became aware that wait a second, what I was doing was not congruent with what I felt in my heart and what I knew it was possible. So then, how do I come up to the next step in that evolution? Right? Making a decision that I know what needs to happen. I'm giving myself permission, like what's the next step, which for me was all around making a conscious decision that that's something I want to change. Mm-hmm. And once you get the step where you are aware, you accept the fact that it's okay where you are right now, you can show yourself some grace, some love, and you make a decision to move forward, then everything changes. And that's what I find myself today, because I realized what was missing, and I'm trying to bring in what's missing into my life. And when I say I'm being careful with my words here, because it is an attempt, right? You are trying it, but then at the same time, I'm also doing it, right? So if I were to switch my words and I was saying, instead I'm trying, is I'm doing it. Now, if I repeat this to myself over and over, my mind, the same brain that we're just talking about, is going to look to show proof of that. If I say I'm trying, well, it's not going to be so internalized. It's not going to be so emphasized, because it's just you're trying. So it's okay to fail. It's okay to succeed. But if I'm switching my terminology, I'm doing this right now. Well, now you're looking for proof. Well, how am I doing that in my life? So for me, it helped a lot, to your point from earlier, to look at my life and also look at the way I talk to myself, the way I allow things to come up from within, and analyzing that internal messaging that I've been telling myself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Because I do feel like so many of us have this embedded sense of fear or shame or anger that holds us back. And that you raise the point of awareness as well. I've said really, since I've come to points of clarity on my own journey, that self-awareness is the key to changing anything, as you just reiterated. I think a lot of times we're aware and we're actively ignoring or avoiding also. And so the thing that you said that really stands out to me too, Constantine, is you have to make the decision, right? Just the awareness itself is not enough. The awareness is necessary. You have to have the awareness, because if you don't have the awareness, I always use the phrase, like, you're blissfully unaware. You don't know that it's a problem because you're not seeing it or feeling it. And so when you're actually self-aware, then something in you is saying, okay, this needs to change, or I don't like this circumstance. I want it to be different. And I think we can get caught in this trap of, well, I want it to be different, but I'm not actively doing anything to change the circumstance, because or we're doing little bits and pieces that we want to point to and say, oh, but I'm doing that and nothing's changing. Well, there's two things with that. One, if you're not doing anything, then you need to think about what are the steps you need to take to start inciting that change. But the other part of it, and this is something that I feel, and I'm curious if you experience this as well, if you think about, for me with this podcast, for the first 2 seasons, I was very inconsistent. I was working my full-time job. I was going through a lot in my personal life. I ended up taking a season off, or like a year off. And I recognized that there was really no momentum. I couldn't gain the benefit of having consistency. And so when I started this again and started releasing again last year, or earlier this year, I should say, in January, it was my distinct decision to say every single week an episode's going out. If I am not prepared to have a guest's episode go out, I will put an episode out. I think that maybe happened once or twice. And the thing is once you start holding yourself accountable to that awareness, that's where you start to see the impact. And, plenty of people I'm sure have heard of the compound effect, read the book, or just are aware of the concept. And it does speak to the fact that you need to have consistency, I think, in a lot of ways to hold you accountable. So I'm curious what your perspective on that is.
No, I love that you went there. Absolutely, 100%. And what I have found, it all starts with awareness, like we just talked about. But what awareness gives you is a choice. Because now you can't blame it on, oh, I didn't know any better. You know something, right? And I've been there myself many times. I know you smile there. I think we've all been there before many times, right?
Yeah.
But once you can make a choice, you can make a choice and say, you know what, I'm aware of this situation, but I choose not to do anything about it right now because it's not that high up on my priority list. That's fine. You can come back to it later if you want to. But for those things that are important to you, and now you become aware of them, now is when you want to take what I call the action step. You mentioned a similar idea, right? Because you want to say, okay, I'm aware of this. I know I want to do something else. What's my vision look like, and how do I get there? And that's where people get stuck often, because the way society has been, at least for me, it shows you that people set their mind up for something and then they achieve the result fairly quickly, right? Because if you look at social media, you don't see everything that happens between point A and point B. Yeah. All of a sudden you see the transformation, be it weight loss, personal transformation, a career progress, or launching a new website, or whatever the case might be. And what I got stuck myself in the past is that I would compare myself to others and be like, well, that person went from A to B in 6 months. I only saw the ups, I never saw the downs. Why is my journey different? And why am I struggling? And why is it taking me twice as long? And for me, the answer was very simple, but also very hard to accept, which is the idea that, of course, we're all unique, which means that what works for you, Nikki, is not going to work for me, and vice versa, right? There are parts of the tools that will work for both of us, but most of the time, we each have different things that work for us. And because we are unique, that means that what may take you 3 months may take me 6 months, and what may take me 3 months may take you 12 months, or you may not be able to do it, right? Or vice versa. So once I wrap my head around that, I feel like that's another piece of awareness, right? It's becoming aware that in the end, where you put your power, or where you give your power, is what shows back up in your life. Because if I give my power away and I expect everyone to tell me what to do next and what steps to take and what programs to follow, then I don't have control over that. I'm just a hamster on the wheel.
Yeah, trying to play catch up.
Exactly, right? Like if you take it back into your life and be like, okay, what resonates with me? You take a bit more control and ownership of the problem.
When you consider that sort of growth that we're seeking to achieve, whether that's personal, professional, emotional, whatever it might be, we do have this inclination to judge ourselves in comparison to others.
Yes.
This is not a new topic. Social media has exacerbated that. It was, I think, a lot easier to bury our heads in the sand when you weren't seeing everybody else's journey right in front of you. But the point that you make, and I think this is something that, I grapple with myself and we hear about constantly, is that we're not seeing the full picture. I think a lot of people want the answer to just be cut and dry. If you do this, then this is the result. But the thing that we don't account for are all the variables in our lives, our independent circumstances that may or may not support that path forward. It doesn't mean that bits and pieces of what you're learning or what worked for somebody else might not work for you, but that distinct experience that you are living is your experience. You don't know what personal life circumstances are coming to those other people at the same time, in the same length of time that you're looking at, saying, oh, well, they did it in 6 months. Okay, well, like, let's say, maybe you broke your leg and it's taking you longer because that was a distraction because you had to go through all of these healing things for that. Like, we're so desperate to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but then we sort of shame ourselves for not getting to the end of that tunnel fast enough. Personally wish that I could, I'm going to rephrase this because this is the whole internalized self-talk, right? Like, I wish I could. No, I can. I need to, and I'm working on allowing myself freedom from that judgment, because it's so easy to spiral out and look at it and say, I'm doing all of this work and nothing's happening. No, nothing's not happening. Things are happening, but they're just not happening in accordance with somebody else's timeline. And we have to be able to be understanding of that for ourselves. And in particular, I think about, I just mentioned to you, I left my tech job a couple of months ago. And this is, part of our journey that's sort of similar, is wanting to be able to pursue something that's really more rooted in our passions. And it's like, but doing that didn't mean like, oh, all of a sudden I'm a world famous podcaster and I have just money flowing in the bank and everything's great. It's like, no, now there's a different set of challenges and I have to prioritize different things. And this is the part that really stands out to me about what you said before. And it took me a second to loop back around to this, is you might still see it as a priority. It may not be the top priority right now. And we have to juggle a lot. And we forget sometimes how many balls are in the air. And then we're like, well, why didn't I catch that one this time? It's like, because you had 9 other things you were trying to do. So if you don't hone your focus on it, what are you expecting to achieve?
Beautifully said, Nikki. Absolutely. Absolutely. And on the subject of all of us being different, yet we're not alone. We can do this together. And that's another part where I feel people fall short, and I fell short myself. I thought I had to do everything myself, and that my problems were my problems only, and no one else shared whatever problems I was going through, challenges I was going through. The reality is that while we are unique, there are 7 billion people in the world. There are many others that are struggling or have struggled with one of the same things you're struggling with. Yes, circumstances are different. However, that means you're not alone, which means that you can sit down with a friend or someone you just met, or someone on the internet that has gone through what you've gone through or is going through what you're going through, and can help each other go to the next level. So that was a big mentality shift for me, in understanding that what I'm going through is unique, but at the same time, it's not, because other people are going through similar situations. So me sharing my journey can help others. Me reaching out and finding people that have been on this journey or are on this journey can help all of us. Now, if we go back to the uniqueness for 1 second, I feel the biggest part that was missing for me throughout my entire life was this idea of limiting beliefs and beliefs that I acquired in my young age, right? I was born in Eastern Europe. I grew up throughout the communist era for the first 7 years of my life. I didn't grow up with my parents. I grew up with my grandparents. All those things had an impact on my life, and I didn't realize that. I mean, I had a fairly good childhood as far as I remember, but there was a lot of trauma in there that was specific to me that I didn't realize until I started doing work with my inner child, looking at what's specific and unique to me that's going to make my journey unique. And when I started working with those limiting beliefs, when I started working with healing that inner child, that's when progress essentially leaped overnight, because all of a sudden those limiting beliefs were no longer there to hold me back.
So when you're speaking about that transformation for you, really, that ability to reframe your circumstances and pull away from those self-limiting beliefs by doing the inner child work. What did that look like for you? How did you approach that to be able to get to that place?
That's a great question, Nikki. For me, it started last year when I went to Ecuador for my mental health retreat, which included some plant medicine. And through the plant medicine, I was able to connect to my inner child. I'll be honest with you, this was April of 2022. I actually had no idea what an inner child was. I thought it was, woo-woo talk. And
yeah.
We looked into it. Then some people sat down with me, some very knowledgeable older ladies explained to me what it was and why it's important to connect. They showed me how I can do that. And lo and behold, I started to connect with my inner child through plant medicine first and then meditation later. Now, earlier this year, so about a year later, I had a conversation on my podcast with a hypnotherapist, someone that specializes in getting you to connect to those younger versions of yourself. And I had a beautiful conversation with her. And a couple of months later, I had this idea, you know what, I've never tried something like that. I still want to connect deeper with my inner self, with my higher self, but also my inner child. So let me reach out to her. So I did. And I had an amazing session that ranks in the top 2 or 3 best experiences of my life, because it allowed me to connect to that inner child. Like I'm talking about my 2-year-old version, my 3-year-old, my 4-year-old. These are things that I don't have an active memory of, yet I was able to connect and feel all the feelings, have even visual elements to it. Like I could see myself in the crib with my caretakers around, and I could feel what that person was feeling and why certain limiting beliefs and certain reactions were happening in my life. And before doing this first session, I had no expectations. You know what? I have an open mind. I want to try things out. But the amazing thing happened literally the days following this session, because I had done work on my reactivity in my personal life with my partner and those around me, because I was someone that would get triggered easily and maybe say something sarcastic, maybe raise my voice, maybe yell. And I knew that there was not someone I wanted to be, yet I grew up in that environment. So for me, it was normal to express my frustration or my feelings that way.
Similar to you, I've had that moment where I'm like, this is something that is a response, but it's not who I am. And I need to manage that. Like, I can't just allow that to persist. So I really appreciate that you said that, because I don't want people to feel like that's just who I am. It's like, no, that's what you understand about how, like, that's sort of how you were bred, quote unquote, to receive conflict and to respond to conflict. But that is something that we can change if we so desire to. And it's not straightforward. Like that is a muscle that I'm constantly building.
And you're absolutely right that it's not straightforward. And you know what? Funny, you mentioned that. It's exactly how I felt. I'm like, that's me. You either accept me for who I am or you don't. But then what I came to realize after is that it wasn't congruent with what I felt in my heart. And I started doing work on it maybe 2-3 years ago now. But in that time, including plant medicine and my own meditation and my own work, I made maybe 10-20% progress. Like I would sometimes be able to take a moment before reacting. But other times I would react right away because the trigger was too strong. Now I go into this hypnotherapy session. It's a 2-hour session. I'm done with it. And I remember the next day, I'm walking up the stairs. I see my partner doing something in the kitchen that I would normally be triggered by. And I stop before I even take the last step on the stairs. And I'm looking at her. I'm looking at myself. I'm like, I know I should be triggered right now, but I'm not. And that was like, I had no idea what was going on. It's like, what's happening here? And what it turned out to be, at least the way I understand now, is we healed those wounded versions of my young self that would chime in through the subconscious and get triggered and then create the reaction. Behold, over the 3 weeks following, I would say 90% of those situations have been drastically improved. Is it perfect? No, nothing is perfect, but it's getting much closer. So I went from making some progress to making significant progress overnight by being able to go in and heal that part of myself. And I continue to enhance that through meditation practices, affirmation practices, and other methods.
It's incredible to see how much of an impact the subconscious work has on our ability to shift our perspective, adjust our behaviors. When you speak to that moment where you acknowledged that something would trigger you, but you also felt within you that your response wouldn't be the same, it's a very, I've had I had an experience like this, honestly, like a week ago. My partner was also surprised because we were both like, normally I would freak out right now. I think that part of what I felt in that moment was a sense of peace and gratitude for the fact that I wasn't as reactive or explosive, because it creates an environment where it can be more productive. That's like kind of the end goal, right? But even just within myself, being able to acknowledge that isn't the response that I have to have. There is another way to do it. And that's sort of what you're speaking to with regard to everything we're discussing here, is you can take control of elements of your life. I'm not foolish enough to believe that we can control it all. There's so many extenuating circumstances, but your mention of going inward and really addressing these parts of ourselves that either we keep hidden or we don't even know exist, it's something that I feel is really transforming society right now. And you had used the phrase earlier with previous thoughts on the idea of inner child being sort of woo-woo. And I totally agree with you. And now I'm one of those people that's like, let me tell you more about your inner child or your subconscious healing and these things that you need to do. And that's because I've done the work in varying degrees, and there's still more to do, of course, but I've done the work and I see the benefit of it. And I feel like there is no denying that there is a positive impact from doing this. So does it benefit me more to be in denial of it and just straight up refusing, stomping my foot, digging my heels and being like, no, there's nothing we can do about this. This is who I am. Or does it benefit me and the people in my life more to say, you know what, there's an opportunity for change. Let's see how we can go about this. And to circle back to the point that we made earlier, it's not the same for everybody, but I find that some of these things are a little bit of trial and error also. I mean, there are certain meditations that I come back to over and over again or affirmations that I feel are meaningful and helpful to me. And then there's others that I listen to and I'm like, this doesn't jive with me. This doesn't feel right. And that's okay. So you have to be willing to be flexible and adaptive to the things that you're trying and acknowledge if what you're doing isn't working and recognize, I mean, you're in tech, so I feel like you'll appreciate this. You have to have a fail fast mentality, right? If it's not working, on to the next thing, right? But some things, they take a little bit of time and we need to give ourselves space to explore that. And the point that you're really making here is that self-inquiry is mission critical to getting to that place of healing and overcoming these doubts or limiting beliefs or reactions that we have.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I strongly, strongly feel that fail fast is an approach that we should take with many of these tools that we find online. But with some of them, you'll be able to tell right away if there's something that resonates with you or not. Mm-hmm. And you can give it time for you to see results like meditation or certain forms of meditation, breath work, inner child work, any of these things you can try. And there will be a method that works for you and you'll see the results. Because if you think about the subconscious mind for a second, and I'm happy you brought it up as well, it controls 95% of your daily actions, 95%. So that means your conscious mind only controls about 5% of what you do.
That's terrifying, by the way. It's like, what are we even doing here?
Well, that's good and bad at the same time, right? Because again, we're both in tech. I'm not sure how many of the people in the audience are in tech, but the idea, think of the computer you use, the phone you use, right? Like it has hardware, which is the screen and everything that's behind the scenes, but then it has software on it as well. And most of us have how many apps installed on our phone? Maybe 100, let's say on average, let's say. How many of those do you use on a daily basis? But how many of them are running in the background to make everything else work? So what runs in the background is your subconscious mind. So for example, I had those programs from when I was like 3 years old, 7 years old that were re-emphasized throughout my life that in order to feel safe, I need to react a certain way. Now, there's another subconscious level because, again, think about what your mind is trying to do, protect you. So if it feels you are attacked, it's going to use a program that in my case was maybe instilled in me 35 years ago, Well, if I'm trying to use my phone and I have an app that hasn't been updated in like even 6 months, it's going to be hard for me to get much out of it.
Yes. Yes. I love that you made this analogy, because now I'm going to leave this conversation like, okay, I need to update some software.
Right? And that's our internal software. And you talked about that internal work. For me, I didn't realize the power of self-discovery until I started looking inwards, because like many people, I was someone looking externally for not just validation, but the answers. Oh, my parents will know what the right step, what the right next step will be. Oh, those gurus online know what the best 3-step process will be for me to lose weight or achieve whatever I want to achieve. And then when you give your power away to everyone else, then you don't give time to yourself to really see what resonates with you and what makes sense for you. And that's how I feel most of us find ourselves where we are today, where we're full of anxiety and full of depression and full of thoughts of not being good enough, because we allow everyone else to dictate what's good enough for us.
For sure. And I feel like a product of that for me, and I imagine probably many people, is the reinforcement of that sort of self-doubt or questioning that isn't the self-inquiry, but genuinely, am I good enough? Or is this the right thing to do? Working in the jobs that I had, and it's not, and I don't think this is specific to the tech industry. I think a lot of corporate jobs are like this, where the expectation is this will be done a certain way and you will behave a certain way in these environments where we need you to show up. And that's not to say there shouldn't be professionalism. There absolutely should be. We should be respectful and professional in the environments that require that. But I also feel like it cages people and it takes away from our ability to actually be more productive, to create more value, because there's this very linear way of thinking about it. When I worked at Amazon, it's like if you wanted to pitch a new project idea, you had to write what they call a PR FAQ. And so you basically have to write a paper explaining why you think this is a great idea in the format of a public, basically a PR announcement, and then answer subsequent questions about, things that people might ask to validate that this experience will work. In theory, that's great. But in practice, what ended up happening was you spend so much time working on this stupid paper that you're not actually doing anything. And it just becomes pandering to people around you. And you're sitting there going, but I think this idea is good. But they're like, but the paper's not right, And so it's basically at least my experience with this is it plants this seed of doubt in your head that the idea that you have isn't going to gain traction, isn't good enough. And then so you're just constantly, as you refer to it, on this hamster wheel, spinning, trying to get some sort of result and never seeing that. And when I left big tech and went to smaller companies, some of them, they model after these big companies a lot. And then I think that's to their detriment because they don't have all the, things in place to support those ideas. But then you can go to other places and they're sort of like, they value the diversity of thought and they are able to progress more and at a more expeditious rate because they are giving people the freedom to explore the possibilities. And I think in our own lives, we feel really trapped sometimes in the way that we are expected to be, the thing that we are expected to do, and we lose sight of all of the possibilities. And I think so often we look at it and we say, I'm wasting my potential or I could be doing more, but it's not just the potential. It is the possibilities. I mean, you can do, if the circumstances allow, you can do really anything that you want to. You just have to, as you said at the beginning, decide that that's what you're going to do. I wonder if you feel this way. We're discouraged from making those decisions in a lot of the environments that we're in. It's like the decisions are already being made for you and you're just expected to follow suit. So when you are given the opportunity to make your own decision, you back down a little bit because you're like, well, I don't know. Do I have the authority to make that decision for myself?
I love that you went there. Absolutely, Nikki. And I agree with you. And before I answer your last question, I want to touch a bit on the Amazon example you gave. And that's a really good example of how our life is being led as well, because most of us look externally to find that blueprint. Oh, I'm going to use this formula to try to achieve something in my life. And then lo and behold, it doesn't work. Because what you're missing there is the uniqueness effect or element that we just talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. So in an organization like Amazon, because they have tens and thousands of employees, they will find people that will resonate 100% with the blueprint, and those amazing ideas will come through.
I was not one of those people.
It's a volume game in the end, right? Because one tool will work for some people, but will not work for the majority. The analogy I like to use here is that people win the lottery every single day. It doesn't mean you and I will. Mm-hmm. First of all, we have to play. We might not even play the same game.
Right.
And second of all, it's just a small percentage. Just because some people win it doesn't mean we're all going to win that. Mm-hmm. So those companies and those places that offer a chance for your uniqueness to shine, in the long run will do the best and will enable people to be truly joyful, happy, find fulfillment in their work and life. Because now, like the example you gave, you can shine through, you can bring your ideas to the world through the company that you work with, and then eventually through your own avenues and make it happen. So I feel like we can take a really good example from that and apply it to our life. How can we be unique in our life? It doesn't mean we have to reinvent the wheel every single time. But let's say, take that blueprint that you're talking about, see which part resonates with you or which parts, and then add your own spin to it and then make it something.
For sure. And I feel like that's where we can get really hung up, because you said we're seeking that answer. We just want somebody to give us the answer to the test so we can move faster to the end result. And it's going to be very cliche, but a lot of it happens while you're on the journey, right? So much of that self-discovery, you made the comment that you didn't really understand the value of self-discovery until you were really going through it. And I feel the exact same way. I don't believe that I really knew what that meant. I've always been a pretty introspective person, and I value the ability to sort of question ourselves or bring to light parts of ourselves that maybe we don't often share. But it also creates this expectation of ourselves that it's hard to sit with ourselves. It's hard to sit with ourselves and go there. And so with self-discovery, it's like you have to be in the right mindset. And it's not like, oh, this is how you get into that mindset. For me, at least my perception of it is, you will know when you're there because you're going to start taking the actions that are going to bring you inward. And it sounds like your experience in Ecuador in particular was a real turning point for you with that.
Absolutely. So there's two parts I would like to touch on there. Absolutely. Like, you will get there yourself. It will take time. What I wish I would have done earlier in my life is allow mentors and coaches and other people to help me on this journey. Because of my ego, whatever you want to name it, I was like, no, I'm good enough as I am. I have a great career. I have a great family life. Why would I need a coach? Why would I need a mentor? Why would I need someone to guide me on this path or provide a helping hand?
Because we're figuring it out.
Right. But my mistake there was that now, funny enough, since I started doing my podcast I went live in May of this year, but I started recording in, I want to say February, March timeframe. And I met so many amazing people that I actually started working, like the hypnotherapist I mentioned, but also 4 other coaches or mentors I worked at various points in time, and I still work with some of them. And the progress I was able to make was like 100x what I was able to make in the past, because we all have blind spots. And our family, while they're amazing at helping us figure out those blind spots, it's a different relationship. And sometimes we don't take it seriously. Sometimes they don't want to hurt our feelings, so they won't tell us the real truth. But if you pay someone, or even if you don't, because I have mentors at Microsoft, or I mentor people at Microsoft too, that there's no money being exchanged, you can have a different relationship and they can guide you on this path. Not only that, I have friends in my life now that I'm fostering relationships where I can have this interaction with them. They're honest with me, I'm honest with them, I help them on their journey, they help me on mine, and it's a mutual beneficial exchange where the goal is for all of us to become better and better. Right. And I felt that was a big part of what was missing for me. Yes, I started the journey alone, but I was 39, or I should say, let's say I was about 37 when I started the journey, 38 when I really went on it, 39 when I came back from Ecuador, and I turned 40 this year. And now it's really hitting, high gear, so to speak. But what if I could have done that 20 years ago? Sure, that's a good exercise to look back, but my goal is not to beat myself up and say, oh, I wish I would have started there, but more like be like, okay, so I've been on this journey, all these things. How can others that listen to you and I, Nikki, or work with me, or listen to my podcast, how can they shrink a 2-year time frame down to 6 months so they can do all the things they want to do faster? Not by following a specific blueprint, but by actually taking a blueprint, modifying it to their own persona, own limiting beliefs, own subconscious, and then come out on the other side a lot stronger.
Yes, I agree with you completely. And it really speaks to where I am on my journey in this moment, because a couple of weeks ago, I was saying to my wife, you know, I interview a lot of coaches. I have friends who are coaches. I feel like I understand the value that's there, but I don't know that I ever really see that as a path that I'll go down. I don't know that I would benefit from it. And then I had this, I don't know, it's not even an aha moment. It was sort of this just divine intervention moment where something in me was like, ask for help. And so the first thing that I did was message one of my friends that I met through the show, who's a fellow podcaster, mental health advocate, Eric DeRosa. And I said, hey, I know that, you know, you left your job on Wall Street, you went out, you became a ski instructor, but now a lot of what you do is your podcast and speaking engagements. And I said, I think this is sort of the direction I want to go. I don't want to be a coach. I don't really know what this looks like, but maybe we could chat. And he booked time for me, I think, you know, 1 or 2 days later, like that fast. Right. And just because I asked, people are willing to help and they want to help, but because they want to see you succeed, especially if they care about you. And the people who aren't going to give you the time, if it's because they're too busy or that they don't have the bandwidth just personally, like that's okay. But there are people who are available, wanting and willing to help. And so when you speak to those relationships where it's like, there's not an exchange of money, there's an exchange of thought, there's an exchange of understanding and a desire between the two of you to mutually benefit each other. It's a very unspoken thing, right? Like it's friendship at its core in a lot of ways. And then, you know, so I had this conversation with him, and then I'm consuming more and more content, just trying to get all the junk out of my brain and go more into a place of personal growth and thinking about where I want to go and what I'm doing. I'm listening to more and more content. I'm like, okay, I've been getting these messages from a couple of people that I had signed up for updates for their content, and I've explored things very briefly and just kind of drifted in and out of like trainings and courses and whatever. And then this one night it's like, hey, you have this free coaching consultation. Like, are you going to actually use it? And I've gotten these updates before and I've been like, no. And then for whatever reason that night I was like, okay, I'll book this for tomorrow, because if I don't book it for tomorrow, I'm going to make an excuse as to why I don't want to do it. And then I'm not going to do it. And then I ended up having 2 calls that day with the coach, or with the consultant, and talking through what I was looking to do. And then I come away from this conversation and I say to my wife, I think I'm a hypocrite. Because I think I might actually benefit from having somebody who not like forces me to be accountable, but requires me to commit to myself. And therefore I will be accountable. Now, paying for it does incentivize you a little more, I think, in a lot of cases, but in particular with coaching, because I have courses, I have trainings, right? To me, that's something that exists and I can go do it on demand when I want to do it. Yes. But with coaching, you've got to show up. You have a time that you are scheduled to be there. And if you don't, that is your loss. And so I'm like, if I'm doing this, I'm committing to it. And so my wife and I actually together committed to doing this coaching program for the next 12 weeks. And in just the 1 week since our first session, we've been so conscious of the decisions that we're making, trying to be mindful of habits that we're keeping, and the self-doubt, negative self-talk stuff. It's like, it's there and I can feel it, but it's teetering on the edge, right? It's like, you know, that doesn't need to stay there. So like, when are you going to push it away? When are you going to let that dissolve? And I love that you you mentioned that earlier, because it is the story that we tell ourselves that allows us to move forward or keeps us stuck.
Absolutely. It's 100% about the story we tell ourselves. And the part with someone else in your life, doesn't matter what title they hold, to help you be accountable, help you see what you're not seeing, again, goes back to how our brains are formed, right? If it's all about us staying the same and being safe, that means we're filtering out things that would take us to the next level. By bringing someone in, they can have an outsider view into our life based on whatever information you share. That gives you a chance to now put a spotlight on something you may be ignoring. And one thing that's important to note is in the coaching business, let's say, right? In the real estate business, in many of these businesses where one works for themselves, the failure rate is significant, like 92 to 95%. So there's only a small percentage of people that are really successful at what they do in these fields, right? Anything to do with mentorship and coaching. And what I'm trying to say there is that don't get stuck and say, you know what, I went to this free 1 hour session or free masterclass and I didn't connect with the person, so that means coaching is not for me. It's the same thing as therapy, right? Just because you go to one person doesn't mean it's not for you. You have to try and find your tribe, try to find your people. And that's why I'm a big advocate of any type of coach that offers a free consultation session. See if you can connect with them. And I'll be honest, I attended many of those until I found the ones I can work with. But even with the ones that I didn't necessarily feel a connection with, I still got value out of it. It's all about the mentality you go in with. Are you going in with an open mind and an open mind to learning or not, right? And don't expect them to solve all your problems in one session or put you on a path in one session. But you can find that. And the other part here I was going to mention really quick is the idea of mentorship and coaching. And you may hear me mention both. And in my title of the things I do outside of my corporate job, I call myself a mentor and a coach because I see it as two different things. But if one can do both, that's when you find the real power in someone that you work with. And let me explain. So mentorship for me, it's about forming that personal connection where you're sharing wisdom, you're inspiring the person to find a unique path. So I'm not telling you, Nikki, what my path was or the path of all the other people I've helped, but I'm helping you find your own path. So I'm helping you challenge the status quo. I'm helping you find those answers that you may have not seen yet, right? It's about nurturing a relationship where there's a lot of listening, understanding, and reflection on your own journey. But the coaching, where it comes in, so let's say we've done the mentorship, we found some of those pieces, but now it's about executing. So that's where accountability comes into place. It's being structured and goal-oriented. So let's say through mentorship, we find out that in your case, Nikki, you want to do the podcast full-time, you want to make money. Let's say the podcast is how you want to make money. Well, now let's put a focus and structure and goal-oriented approach on this. So you can use framework, you can use tools, you can use strategies, you can build a roadmap. You can get very actionable and tangible plans, but then also results. So then it keeps you accountable. It's all about growing, taking strategic steps. And in your life, you can have many of these people that play these roles. Like I could say in my life, honestly, between my professional life and my personal life, probably 10 different people I could call mentors. And only a couple of them I would call coaches. What I would go for, like, okay, so I have this plan. How do I now execute this? So help me on that path. So I think that's a big distinction for people to make, because sometimes we're looking for the wrong thing and accepting the wrong thing because we don't know any better.
Oh, I really like that you shared that. And I agree. I think the distinction is super important. And the way that you express that, I agree with. I know for me, to have a trusted mentor, there is some level of friendship there as well, because this person is a trusted resource. Yes. But they're also doing this from a place of generosity and selflessness, trying to help you cultivate your own growth and asking the questions that maybe you don't know or don't think to ask yourself. And a coach may ask you the same things, but to your point, and this is something that came out of even just our first coaching session, and a lot of stuff that you're going to learn in coaching sessions, I would suppose for many people, they're things that you know, they're just not things you're holding yourself accountable to. And so it's like, what is the specific outcome that you want? Not a broad stroke. This is, I'd like my podcast to be the way I make my living. Great. What's the plan? How are you actually going to do that? And when you said the word roadmap, my product management brain was like, yes, a roadmap. That makes sense, And so I think finding what, as you said, what works for you, what do you seek in a mentor? What are the things that make you feel comfortable, safe, seen, understood, and able to receive what a mentor is offering you? And then with a coach, those same questions need to be asked. And you also really want to know that they understand what your desired outcome is, that you understand what your desired outcome is, so you can find alignment with how you can get there and what levels of accountability can be applied throughout that journey. That's sort of my perspective on it. But again, this is very new for me. So I am speaking from a limited knowledge base with the coaching side of it.
It's new for many people. And, it's been new for me as well, despite playing soccer at a very high level in my younger years, where I had coaches and I had mentors. And if I look back, there was a coach that was specialized in shooting versus, let's say, defending versus whatever other skill. But then you had, let's say, the mentors, which would probably be like the team manager, or maybe even a psychologist within the team, was all about, okay, but let's actually look at the big picture. How do you combine the shooting with the defending, with the mentality side of it, and with your vision for where you want to be, and bring it all together? And that's where the difference comes in, because we see this in the sports world everywhere. But you can also look at, let's say, people will say, well, yeah, because sports is physical, you need sort of different skill sets. But look at people that play virtual sports, right? The e-games. They have coaches and they just sit on a chair. Why do they have coaches? Well, or mentors. It's the same idea, because, again, we only know what we know. If we have our blind spots on, which we all do, then we're limiting ourselves. And the way I look at this, to kind of wrap it all around, if you were to combine mentorship and coaching, and again, this can come from one person or it can come from multiple people. In my case, it comes from multiple people. What I offer others, I do both. But it doesn't mean that if you find someone that does both mentorship and coaching, you just stick with them. You could have a mentor and a coach in one, and then you have a bunch of other mentors and coaches separately. But the way I see it is, again, mentorship is about nurturing your soul and your heart, like bringing it out, expanding it, and really getting you to a point where you truly understand what you want to get out of life. While the coaching provides actionable steps to get the soul expressed in this physical form. Right? So it's a synergetic approach between internal alignment and then external achievements. So then you have this fully transformational experience. That's how I see it these days. And I'm like, okay, I wish I knew this 20 years ago.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I also think the point that you made about just trying not to linger in that, frustration, disappointment, shame of not doing it sooner is super important. It's challenging, I think, sometimes when we get to that place of either comparison or just feeling like we don't have the momentum that we want. I think about, I was in a dead end relationship for over a decade, and it's like, well, what could I have done if I were more focused during that time instead of just dealing with the situation that I was in? But I also hadn't achieved the personal growth, the self-awareness that we started talking about at the beginning of this conversation. So even if I knew those things back then, would I have been able to apply them in the meaningful way that I need to? The answer is probably no. And so one of the things that I really love about the upcoming generations is, because of people like yourself and these conversations that we're having, we are able to offer insight and say, like, we're breaking the cycles. We're stopping this mindset that it's sort of the all or nothing. You don't always have to fall in line and just do what you're told to do. You need to go inward to be able to establish what it is you want, who you truly are, how you want to show up in your life, how you want your life to play out as best you can manage that. But by doing that, we're giving younger generations perspective that we didn't have. And they're able to apply that because they're learning the emotional intelligence now. They're learning the importance of our psychological health in much different ways than we did. And I feel like that's part of the opportunity. No, we didn't have it back then, but we get to speak to our experience and share that in a way that shows people who are coming into that part of their life now that you can and you should do that now. And I feel like I learned from them because of it.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, what you and I grew up with not having access to as much information or the right information.
Yeah.
I feel that the challenge is completely on the other side now. Now there's too much information available. And it's very hard for you to decipher which one is information you want to try so you can fail fast and move on, or which one is just wasting your time. And then add on top of it the myriad of options for you to just waste time, because it's so much more pleasurable to just scroll on TikTok for 3 hours than actually take any steps of action. That I feel that even though the younger generations have all this available, it's actually maybe just as hard as it was for us, because there's just too much for them. So it's even more important to have a guide of sorts in your life.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Constantine. I'm glad you said that. And something that I was listening to the other day, I think it was Brendan Burchard had made a comment about, are you consuming or are you creating? Because we can spend all this time on TikTok, for example, whatever social media platform you desire. And if we're just scrolling, sitting there going like, why isn't my brand growing? Why am I not doing more? And it's like, because you're not creating, you're consuming. And that really stood out to me, because I feel like a big part of where I've been holding myself back is putting more content out there. I see value in the content. I know that it's there. I know that this conversation has many sound bites that I can use, but there's that self-limiting belief, that feeling of, well, if I do that, then what? What happens to my ego is what I'm concerned about, not what I really see as the true value of all these conversations. And what you really have highlighted so well in this entire conversation, Constantine, is how important it is to have the presence of mind to revisit these things also throughout your journey, that it isn't just you go in and you solve the problem and now on to the next thing, right? It's a consistent evolution of who we are, and that's to be expected. We are creatures that have evolved over millions of years, but we as individuals here right now in our lifetime are continuously evolving as well. And we have a responsibility to ourselves to look at that and say, is this the way that I want my life to be? And if it's not, take your life into your own hands and find ways to adapt.
Absolutely, 100%, Nikki. Love that. And I would challenge the audience, and it's something that I challenge myself with, is ask yourself a simple question. What do you believe your purpose in this life is? If it's just to have fun and enjoy your life, fine. There's no one else that knows that better than you do. But if you feel in your heart that there's more out there, that there's something you want to be doing, well, find what it is and do more of that, so then you can actually have a life full of joy and fulfillment. For some people, it might look like becoming big on social media or climbing the corporate ladder. For others, it might be that they, buy a piece of land, they have a house, and they live by themselves with their spouse and their dogs and their pets, and that's it, right? There is no wrong or right answer there. But if you don't ask those questions, then who is better equipped to give you those answers? I mean, your mother and father, probably not, right? Your sister and brother, no, definitely not. Like,
most of the time, we're trying to deny what our parents told us. We're like in direct opposition of it.
So ask yourself those questions, because for me, it wasn't until I really sat down and looked at my why, my purpose, my vision, that it truly opened up the door to more. Because once you are in congruence with what you truly believe, then it's much easier to do more of the things that bring you those beliefs into your life than otherwise.
Yes. And something that you've said throughout this episode that I just really love, and it's a phrase that comes up a lot in my life, but more in particular in the past month or so, is living in congruence with yourself, with the things that feel right to you. And that's a term that I don't feel was really ever used while I was growing up. It wasn't a thought in our heads. And to me, that's the experience of recognizing that what you are doing, how you are living, thinking, whatever it might be, does not actually feel right to you on a visceral core soul level. Is that how you feel when you think about living in congruence?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Absolutely. Because going back to the example we gave earlier, when I was reactive and I would raise my voice and I would make my partner or someone else in my life feel less than, or I would feel like I got one over them, even though maybe in the moment I felt, I was great and whatever, deep down it didn't feel right. But again, I was ignoring that and kept doing it over and over. So yes, congruence is about how right does it feel in your heart? How much joy and fulfillment and happiness and compassion and empathy and love it brings up when you do something. Like for most of us, if we do something nice for someone else, we feel good about it. Well, why is that? If we do something nice for ourselves, right, we feel good about it. Why is that? Right? So like ask yourself those questions and see what comes up, because I do believe that I don't want to generalize things as we've talked so far, but there is a common theme where most of us, when we look at purpose and why, has to do with being in service of yourself and of those around you. Now, how you show up in service of others can vary drastically between person to person. For you and I, it could be through the podcast. For others, it could be through doing charity work, from volunteering over the weekend at a shelter, from working with animals. You name it, there's so many different ways that they can show up in your life. But I did find between all the people I've been working with and had on my show, there's a common theme about we're here to help each other be a better version of ourselves and be happy together.
This has been such an enlightening conversation, Constantin. I'm so glad we finally got on to record together. Your passion for your purpose is really evident and inspirational. And this has just really opened my mind and heart more. So I'm so grateful that we got to spend this time together. Before we hop off here, I do want to make sure that people know where they can find you. Constantin's podcast is called Unleash Thyself. It is great. You should go listen to it. You can learn more at unleashthyself.com. You can also follow Constantin on LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. And I think on YouTube and TikTok, it's at Unleash Thyself. We'll put everything in the show notes, and Instagram's at Unleash Thyself Today. Is there anywhere else you want people to follow or find you, or anywhere you want to point people to learn more about you or your show?
Yeah, no, I mean, if you want to send me a message, if you want to chat with me, always happy to chat about any of these topics here. All of them fascinate me. Through my website, through LinkedIn, you can connect and we can chat, or just send me an email at constantin@unleashthyself.com. And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Well, gang, that's all for this episode of Who the Fuck. We'll catch you on the flip side.